Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we work with the management of cultural heritage in Norway. Okay, I'll just see if I can get this to work. So my name is Anette Robberstad and I work at the Directorate for Cultural Heritage in Norway. Today I'm going to talk about what is a cultural heritage in our understanding, and also how we at the Directorate work with cultural heritage, but also the different levels of management in Norway. And I'll also show some examples from Norway and the Norwegian experience of cultural heritage management lately. So, who are we? The Directorate for Cultural Heritage Management in Norway is the executive body and the advisory body of the Ministry of Climate and Environment, so it's a bit different than here. And we are the primary authority regarding cultural heritage in Norway. And my colleague and I, we work under the Department for Planning, Heritage and Archaeology. So mainly our everyday life is about area planning, but also the international issues are situated under our department. So that's why we're here today. So what is a cultural environment? We believe that the cultural environment is not just a mix of single monuments. It's definitely an area where monuments and sites form a larger entity, and every part of the entity has a value. So if a part of the entity is lost, then part of the story of the entirety is lost. So we wouldn't be indifferent if one of these buildings were down or something like that. We wouldn't be indifferent to what actually pops up in this area. Yeah, we have a different system, I guess, than you. Management in Norway is divided between 3 levels, basically. We have Riksantikvaren, or the Directorate, which is the national level, and we have the counties, you can see over here on the map, which is the regional level, and we have the municipalities. At the Directorate, our responsibility is mainly to implement policies and develop strategies, and also the knowledge building, which is very important for us. And the counties actually work quite in a similar way, but only they work more direct with the municipalities. They have more casework and more guidance directly towards the municipalities. And then you also have the municipalities, which might be the actually most important planning authority in Norway. They have responsibility for local plans and zoning plans, and they also have the responsibility to put our cultural environment into these plans. And also we work under 2 laws. It's the Cultural Heritage Act of 1978, which is now being revised actually, and we have also the Planning and Building Act. It might be quite difficult to go into the technicalities of this, but maybe the most important thing to know is that we have sort of a checks and balances system, that if the municipalities forward a plan that is not in tune with the national politics, the counties and the Directorate can actually oppose to this plan. Yes, and we work from the basis of this white paper. You can see all the way up here. I don't know if, can I point with this? Oh, no, sorry. So we have this white paper that is the basis of how we work, and it's called New Goals for Norway's Cultural and Environmental Policy. And this is a very important document because it says that our cultural environments should be a contribution to tackle climate change. It should be a resource that should be used for tackling climate change, and also a resource that will also preserve the local identity of an area. So as a result of this, and as a sort of an answer to this, we have the strategy for urban heritage in Norway, and we also have a registry of urban areas and landscapes that has a national interest. And the interesting part about this, that this registry and also this strategy actually contains guidelines for how you should develop these areas. These guidelines aren't binding by law, but they are guidelines that we hope the municipalities will use as something to work against. So I'll show some experiences from Norway. Maybe the last 30 or 30 years or so in Norway, we see a very big shift where you have the object focus, and from the object focus to going into more of the context focus. So here's a situation from Oslo. You can see the classic situation of a lot of pressure being put on an area to be built. Here's the situation in 1887. You see all of these old factory buildings here. And this is the situation of today. So the question for us always when we work in areas like this is, how do we work with these areas to maintain the local identity? If it's hard to actually see the local identity when you walk around the area, how can you know the story of this place, right? So this is one of the bigger issues we have in the bigger cities in Norway today. This is a typical development projects in Norway. You see how high-rises are being drawn on top of older buildings. And this project over here has been up for many years now. You can see how the old factory building is kind of hiding inside the new build. And the problem with this is often that developers think that whenever they put on something new, it's a one-time type of thing. But we know that this isn't true. It's definitely it's going to be interesting to see how these areas look in maybe 50 years, 100 years, and we won't know, but in 200 years or so. But the message is that it's always important to know the story of the place when you put up something, because the long-term perspective is very, very important. Here is Tønsberg. It's a much smaller city than Oslo, further south. It is known as the medieval city of Norway, the oldest city of Norway. It has certain areas with very cozy wooden buildings and such. But this is also Tønsberg today. So we see kind of a similar situation that you have in Oslo, but on a much smaller scale. The area of the city has become quite fragmented. The buildings are very different everywhere, so even though you have the structure of the medieval town, you might not even experience it when you walk around. So can we then preserve this as an area of national interest when we don't recognize it when we walk around? These are the questions that we work with every day in my department. And also we have these things happening more and more lately, fires. Because of climate change, we know these things will happen probably more often. Here is a situation from 20 years ago or even more, where an old wooden building in Trondheim burnt to the ground, and this is the rebuilt plot. And we see how the focus has been on the object rather than on the entirety of the area. But there is hope, of course. This is probably 15 years later. It's Frimerkehuset in Bergen. It was one of the older buildings in Bergen that burnt to the ground. And instead of thinking that they should put on something completely new, they decided to do, of course, a copy of the old building to keep the identity of the area in place. And this is what we call city repair, and it's one of the things we work with at the directorate, that it's not wrong to actually make a copy if you need to make a copy in some areas. Yes, this is a proposal for a development that we had on our table not too long ago. It's in Haugesund, a smaller town on the western coast. And the picture over there is how Haugesund is known to everyone. It's old wharf buildings and such. And this is the plan that the municipality put forward, and we put an objection to it. This is the oldest part of Haugesund as well, where it's located. And after quite a lot of work with the architect and the municipality, the project ended up here. And this is on a quite early stage, because it's a regulation stage. But and some people might find this a bit strange, because you get this kind of mixed thing. It's not a wharf, but it's also because it's a residential building, right? But it's we try to keep some of the ideas from Haugesund put into a new context and into a new situation. So it's going to be quite interesting to see in many years' time how this is actually holding up. But we believe maybe this is a more interesting way of go to keep the colors, keep the shapes and volumes of the city of Haugesund instead of putting up something that could be put up anywhere in the world.
Sorry, are you going to replace the historical building?
No, they are not going. They are going to replace one of historical building that is actually being torn down. So that's sad, but yeah, it's inside a historical area. This is a different location again. It's in Kristiansand. It's a case we bring forward quite a lot because it's interesting to see how all of these buildings were actually going to be torn down, and it's in the middle of a national interest area. We managed to keep the facades only, and on the inside of these facades there is now a big shopping mall. So many people might think that, okay, this has kind of become like a city prop, right? Because the inside and the outside do not correspond. But we still believe that from the street level, this keeps the history of this area, and it actually works quite well. You can go into the shopping mall and do some shopping and come back out again, and it doesn't compromise the inside of the building, right? So these buildings are quite robust. And we see a different situation here from way further back when, in Stathelle. It's even a smaller town, not far away from Kristiansand. And this is the mentality of not thinking about the local identity and local practice and what happens when you put up a big shopping mall as kind of a backdrop of a smaller city. It can actually ruin quite a lot. And I guess maybe this little illustration that one of my colleagues made a long time ago speaks for itself. Yeah. And we have something very interesting going on in Norway these days, and we think it's a result of this focus going from the objects and the high-rises that we have seen popping up as the development plans, and also the big development plans that's been normal for the last 20 years. It's called arkitekturopprøret, and directly translated it means the architecture rebellion. And it's actually just common people getting together and trying to speak up against what they believe is not right. So it's quite interesting because they have actually become very big. Many people thought they would just, be a short-term rebellion, but it's now been going on for several years, and they are demanding a more traditional way of looking at architecture, and also a more traditional way of looking at planning. So they want many of the same things that we are working towards at the Directorate. They want the more human scale, and also buildings that refer to the surroundings instead of looking at every building as one building. And they want quality in the projects. But then they have been criticized for being a bit shallow in the way that they present their agenda. They have quite a stricter way of speaking about it, and also they really idealize traditional buildings. They say that they do not like modernism at all, which is of course a problem if you want to actually reach the architects. You have to maybe talk about quality and no quality instead of talking about what is pretty and what is not pretty. But it's been a very interesting voice in Norway these days, and they actually have gained their own little area inside the review of architecture in Norway where they can write. So it's on everyone's lips these days. And we believe maybe these have they have contributed to actually accelerate the discussion in Norway and how we actually plan when we either refurbish a building or when we put up a new building. For example, here the architect has tried to be a bit more creative. Instead of putting on new balconies when they transformed this from a hotel to a residential building, they looked to the architecture and because these railings wouldn't be allowed in Norway these days, right? Because the openings would be too big. but they put glass behind instead. And so we see small little changes where architects actually try to move towards being a bit creative instead of just putting up something from today. And this is maybe the building that's been discussed mostly these days in Norway. This is the situation 10 years ago, the proposal from the architect about 10 years ago, and this is the proposal from 2023. It's the same office that's been drawing both of these projects, and it kind of describes this change that we are experiencing in Norway today, going from the object focus and towards the focus on the whole. So yeah, we believe that there is definitely hope, and especially when it comes to this arkitekturopprøret, we think that this could actually be a very, it could spike maybe even for us who work with cultural heritage management, it could be definitely a good voice into this discussion, because we see now that bigger offices in Norway, architectural offices, actually plan more, not historical buildings, but they actually move towards more traditional ways of looking at things, and they definitely want to put their the surroundings into the plans even more than they did just 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And that's a very good change also for us, I believe. So, yeah. So thank you. It was just a short presentation of what's going on in Norway these days.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So we actually have a moment for questions, and
Sure.
and Anette is not going to be on the panel. So yes, I'll bring you the. Where did I leave the? Maybe there. Ma annaks veel sõna. Palun.
Hello. I had opportunity to visit in frame of this project Norway, and I'm till now really pleased by your system when local governments are developing development plans and you have right to approve them or not.
Yes.
And because, as you heard morning, this is really quite a topic within heritage community in Estonia. Maybe could you elaborate a little bit on this? I know that for you it's a new system. How you feel? Is it now better than before when the heritage system has been centralized by how we have, or you would like to go back?
I think, first of all, the situation in Norway and Estonia is, of course, a bit different, because Estonia is smaller and Norway is a very long country with different municipalities. And the sizes of the municipalities are also very different. So in a municipality like Oslo, for example, you would have a lot of people working with cultural heritage. If you go to a small municipality in the north, for example, you might just have one person, or maybe just not even one position filling this kind of work. So it's very different from municipality to municipality, and this is maybe what we see as difficult with this system that we have, because especially in the rural areas, you lose maybe you lose the knowledge that you might have in the cities, because people maybe live in the cities because that's where you find work. But then again, it's also, I think it works quite well, because you get on the local level, you get the local knowledge that we can't have in Oslo. And that's very important when you want to make, for example, cultural heritage plans, which is now become quite common for every municipality in order to have. Not everyone has it, but many municipalities have either started making a cultural heritage plan, or they have finished making a cultural heritage plan. They know what they have, right? We don't really know everything about Norway. So this is, again, on the other side, it's a good thing. But then, of course, in Norway you have, it's a democracy. So when, for example, The municipality, they put forward a plan, and it's the administration that puts forward this plan, and the politicians, they approve this plan. But then suddenly they decide to also maybe approve a zoning plan within this area that does not follow the municipality plan. And that's when it becomes difficult, because it becomes a situation of give and take and very political, basically. And that's when also we get to join in and say, okay, this does not follow the national plans of this area, you have to stop. And then we get the situation where we can actually work together, the municipality and the directorate, for example, with certain areas. I think that's actually quite a good way of going about it, but it's also kind of a slow way of going about it. It takes time. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's... I haven't worked at the directorate before they moved the responsibility to the regions, but I think it's been successful so far. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anette. Let's give a big hand.